When you think of all-time great racetracks, you always go to the Europeans. Spa, Silverstone, the Nürburgring, they're all amazing. And usually the Americans are kind of left by the wayside, because everyone thinks we just go in circles. But there is one circular-based track that rises above the rest to join the likes of Silverstone, to join the likes of Spa. I'm talking about the Daytona International Speedway. Daytona Beach is no stranger to racing. Its flat, barren beaches had everything from the first sanctioned NASCAR race of the Hudson Hornets' first win to 15 world speed records set on those pristine beaches. But that track was not to last as more and more spectators began to arrive. Therefore, NASCAR President William France Sr. set his sights on a more permanent track, and he saw the incredible development of paving banked tracks at the 4 proving grounds as the way to build his new circuit. And he didn't just want to have any banked track, he wanted to take it to the max that was possible at the time. What became of this endeavor was the steepest banked track in the country, 4 cars wide at a 31-degree angle. Now, in order to keep the track banking stable and level that high up, you need a lot of earth below it. So they excavated over 1 million square yards of dirt from the infield to create the bankings and, at the same time, Lake Lloyd at the infield. The design was a revolutionary tri-oval layout which had a 3,000-foot-long straightaway while still providing the tens of thousands of fans a clear view of everything on the circuit. So after 6 years of construction, the first race was held on February 22nd, 1959. 42,000 people saw Lee Petty beat Johnny Beauchamp by a nose in a photo finish that took 3 days to verify. That was the first race. That's a pretty good start. And in April, it had its first open-wheeled race. One of the few open-wheeled races that Daytona would actually host, with the Champ Car driver Jim Rothman averaging over 170 miles an hour, the fastest average speed ever recorded for any race ever at the time. It was also at that race where George Amick became the first of 40 fatalities to occur at the Speedway. And yet, less than 24 hours later, it hosted its first endurance race on the track, but we'll get to endurance racing later on. That's a different section. Now, to address the inherent danger of such a high-speed course, the track had several revisions over its lifetime, including swapping the regular freeway guardrails for safer barriers as the 2000s rolled along. And they also installed massive spotlights around the entire oval for night racing, although the lights are so bright that it might as well be daytime. And the races themselves expanded greatly. Sure, open-wheel racing never really came back to Daytona, but everything else did. Motocross, dirt track racing, short track racing, go-karting, rallycross, powerboat racing, and even both types of football. But there are 2 events that are among the most famous in the entire world. As I mentioned at the start, the first ever race held at Daytona International Speedway was a NASCAR event, specifically the most famous of them all, the Daytona 500. Now this race, along with the Indy 500, is the event that disproves every European with a superiority complex that thinks ovals are so easy that a sloth could do it. Because the Daytona 500 has 200 laps, with average speeds of over 177 miles an hour, nose to tail with 30 other cars around you in a group that can be up to 4 wide. And you wonder why the big one happens every year. The crashes are insane at those speeds. It's why a lot of people watch these events. But I think the people that watch the Daytona 500 just for the big one misses a key element that I love dearly. And that is, it's a very complex event with strategy usually being the deciding factor, while technology and outside-the-box tactics are critical to gaining that racing edge. I mean, Robert Johnson won in 1960 despite having an older car because he was the first person to use the aerodynamic principle of drafting, while Dodge put the first rear wing on a production car to provide rear-end stability before taking it a step further with the Charger Daytona and the Plymouth Superbird. The winged beasts, as they were called, had massive rear wings, huge nose cones up front, and wheel arch air extractors to maximize their aerodynamic efficiency. They later became the first race cars to breach 200 miles an hour at Talladega, although 200 miles an hour did not actually happen at Daytona for one reason or another until 1984. And then just look at all the crazy loopholes Smokey Yunick abused, including making the first space-frame NASCAR with his infamous 1967 Chevelle. You really do have to think outside the box, or cheat, in order to get that racing edge. You need that edge because there are several legendary races that frequently come down to photo finishes. There was obviously the first race that I mentioned, where Lee Petty won by a nose after a 3-day examination, and in doing so became the only person to win the Daytona 500 as a driver and as a team owner in the same year. Or what about 1976? Where David Pearson limped across the line following a crash with Richard Petty to take the win. Or 1979, where Cale Yarborough and the Allison brothers got into a fistfight on the first ever live broadcast of the event, an incident that got Daytona on the front page of the New York Times. And while everybody loves the 2016 Daytona 500, where the leaders were separated by 0.01 seconds, the closest finish in the track's history, there is one tragic race that must be emphasized because it changed motorsport forever. Bill Elliott had an absolute scorcher of a qualifying session, getting pulled by over 0.2 of a second before immediately getting blown away by Sterling Martin at the start of the 2001 Daytona 500. Meanwhile, the Intimidator, Dale Earnhardt, was fighting up from 27th on the grid and making good progress. And after the big one took out 18 cars on lap 173, he was holding in third with his son, Dale Earnhardt Jr., battling for the lead. And then everything happened. The Intimidator watched his son finish second by 1/10 of a second on the final lap, while on the last corner of said last lap, a chain reaction of bumps sent Earnhardt into the path of Ken Shader. The two of them collided into the turn 4 barrier at 160 miles an hour, with Earnhardt suffering 68 Gs. Now, to be honest, in racing, that's not a particularly bad accident. The cars themselves barely looked damaged compared to other NASCAR incidents. However, Earnhardt was one of the drivers openly critical of the recently developed Hans device. The head and neck support device reduced the likelihood of serious head and neck injuries by preventing whiplash. But this was optional, and Earnhardt refused to wear it because, quote, it was uncomfortable, and he even accused it of being a noose, fearing it may choke him in the event of an accident. Sure enough, Dale Earnhardt died of the very basilar skull fracture that the Hans device was designed to prevent. NASCAR adopted the device 7 months later, followed by the rest of the motorsport world, and there hasn't been another NASCAR Cup Series fatality since. And it's not like the accidents have gotten any less severe. But it was still a tragic moment that rocked racing to its core, not unlike the deaths of Jim Clark and Ayrton Senna. It's sad, though you had to have the death of an absolute racing icon to get real change, but to give this story a, not happy ending, but a cathartic ending, his son won the Pepsi 400 at Daytona just 5 months later. But you know what, on a much happier note, there's a race that I think is even better, because it features more variety, more challenges, more corners, and more international prestige than the 500 ever will. The 24 Hours of Daytona. Endurance racing at Daytona dates back to one of his first ever races, the 1959 1,000-kilometer sports car race held on its 3.8-mile infield layout. A race that was shortened to just 560 miles because there weren't any lights and, well, it gets dark at night, funnily enough. So it was won by Roberto Miers in his Porsche 718, which would soon become a common sight at Daytona, a Porsche winning. But unlike Le Mans, which has always been 24 hours since 1923, these Daytona guys just couldn't make up their mind. They couldn't decide what they wanted. First, it was a 1,000-kilometer race slash 560-mile race. Then it was a 3-hour race. They chose to go by time instead of miles. Then they decided to go back to miles, specifically a 2,000-kilometer race, before settling on a 24-hour endurance sprint for a while, before shortening it to 6 hours in 1972, before finally sticking with the 24-hour duration from 1973 onwards. Wow, that's a lot of changes. And that's not the only thing that's different compared to Le Mans. In my humble opinion, I would argue that Daytona is the more demanding racetrack of the two. I know every European is smashing that dislike button so hard they just broke their computer, but hear me out. Le Mans was, at the time of the Daytona endurance inception, essentially an 8.5-mile long trapezoid with a bunch of straight lines that are now periodically interrupted by kinks and chicanes. It's very demanding on both man and machine like every other endurance race, but the track itself is not that difficult compared to others. It's like Mount Everest versus K2. Both of them are very dangerous and potentially very deadly. Everest is the big mountain everyone wants to climb, but if you talk to veteran climbers, K2 is actually the more technically demanding mountain. And Daytona is K2 in this scenario. It's half the length of Le Mans in terms of lap distance, and it covers around 1,000 kilometers less over the 24-hour duration. However, it tests everything that you test at Le Mans, and then it continues testing it even more. Because the infield provides the twisty corners, turn 1 destroys the brakes, and apart from the bus stop at the back straightaway, the cars are flat out from turn 6 to turn 1. And it's not a smooth, flat run like the Mulsanne. It's a 31-degree banking that compresses your suspension into begging for mercy. The first 24-hour race was won by Ken Miles in his Ford GT40 Mark II, the second of 6 wins for a Ford-powered car. But that is nothing compared to Porsche, who has a ridiculous 22 wins to their name, as much as the next 5 manufacturers combined, including 11 straight from 1977 to 1987, without even counting the innumerable number of class wins with the GT cars. And there's some pretty impressive records besides Porsche's dominance. First, there was Porsche's dominance of the 1970 event. The recently redesigned 917K was in a class of 1 that year, and at some point in time throughout the race, the John Wyer Engineering No. 2 car thought they fell a few laps down, and they lost track of where they actually were, so they told their driver to push like mad and try to catch up. Turns out they were already in the lead, and the car that they kept lapping, thinking that they were constantly behind, was their teammates, who they beat by 45 laps. If they wanted a photo finish between the two cars like Ford did at Le Mans, that No. 2 car would have to park on the side of the road for almost an hour and a half before his teammate caught up. Their No. 1 car wasn't slow. Its best lap was 5 seconds faster than Ferrari's qualifying time, and it still beat the Ferrari by several laps. Wyer's Porsches shattered the distance record by 300 kilometers and held it for 10 years until Porsche's own 936 took it back. A Porsche of some sort would hold the record for 47 years until Cadillac beat it in 2018, a record that they currently have just shy of 3,000 miles covered. But that's just one side of the spectrum. The other thing that makes Daytona unique is the fact that the racing is surprisingly close. Usually in endurance racing, the finishing order is measured by laps. Toyota's 1-2 finish in 2022 was 5 laps clear the next manufacturer. But at Daytona, for some reason, these guys do not let up. Maybe it's the greater leniency on behalf of the IMSA officials. Penalties are much less common than the FIA. But regardless, there isn't really a lull in action like there is elsewhere. For instance, in the 2022 Daytona 24, the overall win was separated by just 3 seconds, while in GTD Pro, it was even more intense. We had 2 Porsche GT teams battling each other on and off for 23 hours straight. And as we came into the final 5 laps, we had 2 former Porsche factory drivers who were good friends and former teammates who are now on separate privateer teams with mechanically identical Porsche 911s, so we essentially had a thrilling 911 Cup battle at the very end of this 24-hour race. Let's just say the red and blue cars had a lot of purple paint on them by the end, and after 24 hours of hard-fought-for endurance racing, it came down to the final lap bus stop. The blue Porsche did a very bold up the inside pass on the bus stop, only it didn't really count as a pass since they crashed and the blue car ended up backwards out of the corner and the red car took the victory. But I gotta say, it's the last lap of the 24 hours. Either you win and take the glory or you come second. And that's not what those guys wanted to do. It was a thrilling battle ending in dramatic fashion, and yet that's not even the closest finish. In 2016, the pair of Corvette C7Rs set a Daytona and perhaps even endurance racing finish record, with the two of them separated by just 0.033 seconds. Nobody thought that photo finish could ever be beaten for a 24-hour race, but it was beaten in 2023. The new GTP class was the advertised highlight, if you will, and it was a brand new era of endurance racing, and Acura and Cadillac put on a pretty good show, with Acura ultimately taking a 1-2 finish after some very successful restarts. And it sort of seemed that after Acura secured their position, it would be a nice, easy race. Everyone got into their, secure the position modes, don't do anything stupid in the last few minutes. But some late race drama meant that the LMP2 field was very close together, and the number 55 car in second was pushing like mad. The blue machine was very fast and got a brilliant exit on the final lap bus stop after laps of catching and reeling in the number 4. And on that last lap bus stop, he made his move. He used the draft to close in closer and closer, drawing behind the number 4, pulling alongside the number 4, and crossing the line with a ridiculous margin of just 0.016 seconds. The number 55 beat out the blue number 4 by 16 thousandths of a second after 24 hours of racing. It's the closest finish I've ever seen in endurance racing. It's the type of photo finish usually reserved for MX-5 Cup or NASCAR. My father and I were aghast watching it live. It was brilliant. The Daytona 24-hour is one of the all-time great motorsport events, and if the GTP class has this level of manufacturer support next year, I think the best years of the IMSA Endurance Series and Daytona especially are still ahead of us.